Alright, before we begin with the next part of this little board game tutorial, I need to correct something I said last time. Last time I said that when you have two little regulars and two Nazgul, and the Nazgul die and the regulars die, well, that's all true, but the Nazgul can come back into play. They can be brought back in as reinforcements. These leaders cannot. So just thought I should add that correction before we start. Alright, for this part of the tutorial, we're going to be covering more battle, but now we're going to start talking about battle that happens on various regions of the board and locations and abilities that can be gained from defending and attacking from certain areas. Alright, to start off, we're going to talk about the different kinds of regions, or the different things that you can encounter in each region. First of all, a region can be empty, much like Druath Iawr, or however you say that. Then you can have regions with this little cool symbol in them. This is a fortification region, which one of these is located in the Fords of Isen. Then we can have these cool regions. These are strongholds. This particular stronghold is Helm's Deep. Put that together. We can also have cities. Cities are denoted by these things right here. They're called, like for example, one city is Edoras. We denote cities because they have a box right here that has a picture of a city inside of it. There are also settlements, denoted by this little funky circle city settlement thing right there. Control of the settlements is indicated by these little markers right here. For example, Anorian is controlled by Rohan at the beginning of the game, whereas West Emnet is controlled by Rohan as well. You can go to places like over here in Mordor and look at Nirn. Sorry, it's sideways, it's on a little tripod thing. Nirn is controlled by the Sauron forces at the beginning of the game. So we're going to cover and go over what attacking and defending from these places can do for you during the game. Alright, we will start by talking about fortifications. Let's say that we have a Free People's Army here stationed in the Fords of Isen. The Fords of Isen has a fortification. And then we have a Shadow Army, quite a big one, stationed in the Gap of Rohan. A bunch of little regulars, one elite, and two Sauron leaders, or the Nazgul. Alright, so the way this would work is each side would at first, just like always, determine how many combat dice each side has to roll. From before, we know that both sides, well, from before we know that the Sauron side has 5, because you can never roll more than 5 combat dice. Same for the Free People's Army. But the Free People's Army only has 4, so the Free People's Army is going to roll 4 combat dice. And because the Shadow Army has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 units in there, 6 red pieces, they're going to only roll 5 dice, because the maximum that you can ever roll is 5. Also note that the maximum number of attacking units in any one region is 10. You can never have more than 10 units inside one region. They can be 10 elites, they can be 10 regulars, but you can never have more than, the sum total can never be greater than 10. If it is, then the opposing player, whoever doesn't control that army, gets to remove a piece at their choosing. So we will start. The Shadow Army begins. They roll their dice, and they roll a 6, a 3, a 3, a 3, and a 2. 6, 3 3s, and a 2. And the Free People's rolls a 6, a 4, a 3, and a 3. Now, with fortifications, as far as this is concerned, if it's the first battle or if it's the first die roll, then that means that the Shadow player must roll a 6 to gain a hit. only 6s count on the first roll for the shadow player. Meaning if you would have rolled a 5, like this, a whole bunch of 5s, then none of the 5s would have counted. You can only hit on 6s on the first round when you're attacking fortifications. So for example, because the shadow player rolled junky numbers, except for a 6, then he gets to take off 1 Free People's regular unit, and the Free People's gets to take off a shadow regular unit. So the battle would continue. Oh yeah, and they would get their rerolls. We've been over this, but we're just talking about fortifications. So they would get their rerolls, nothing happens. If by chance the first rerolls were 5s, then they still wouldn't work, because you need to attack with 6s only. Only 6s will count when you're attacking a fortification. Right there. The Free Peoples would also re-roll 2 of their missed die, and they roll another one, so they lose another one. And we've already talked about how you can downgrade elites and whatnot. That's basically it as far as fortifications go. After this round, now that they fought 1 round, it's a normal playing game. So the shadow player has 4 attackable units in there, 4 attacking units in there. The Free Peoples has 3, so they have a combat strength of 3. The shadow player has a combat strength of 4. They roll their dice. And now, because the first round is over, 5s count. So the Free People's player would lose 2 dice after, of course, the reroll, which is right here. A 1 and a 3 didn't make a difference. That one did, though, for the Free People's player, because they also have 2 leaders. So the shadow player would lose another unit, his choice on how to take care of it. But that's basically how it would work. And the Free People's player would lose 1. Normally in something like this, you would retreat into an adjacent area, but we'll get over that later. Alright, now let's start another little scenario. Let's say that there was a battle between some shadow forces in Westemnet and some Free People's forces in Edoras. Edoras being a city, Westemnet being just another free region. So let's say we had some forces like right here in Westemnet, same as before, and we had some Free People's forces in Edoras. It would be exactly like a fortification. During the first round of combat, the shadow forces would have to roll 6s or higher to inflict any damage on the city. After that, normal rules would apply. Just like the fortification is just like a city. Some things to note is, say that the Free People's player somehow got wiped out and the shadow player moved in. The shadow player would now gain the advantage for being in a city. So if somehow the Free People's player, mustered somewhere, some way, somehow, and they got their forces back, they would now have to hit 6s or higher on the first round, and then normal rules would apply after the first round. So if the positions ever flip, like if a shadow player ever gets into a Free People's city or vice versa, then normal rules would apply. Whoever's inside the city gets the defense bonus, whoever's outside doesn't have it. And that's just basically how cities work. Along with cities, we have these little villages or settlements, indicated by these little circular settlement city things right here. So if we had 2 settlements, one right here in Anorian and one right here in Westemnet, there would be no difference in attacking settlement to settlement than if it would be, region to region. So just as long as there's no city, fortification, or stronghold, then it would just be a normal regular battle. Alright, now we're going to talk about we're going to talk about strongholds. We're located here in the Grey Havens, the northwestern portion of the board, and ignore the fact that these are Rohan units. We're just going to pretend that they're elf units. but it really doesn't matter because it could still be valid anyway. We have our Shadow Army right here, we have our Free People's Army right here. Now I know I haven't talked about these dice a whole lot yet. I'm assuming you know how to play, but if you don't, that's okay. We'll cover it eventually. Alright, so we have these dice. As you know, these are the Shadow Player's action dice. We're just going to be concerned with dice that have this symbol on them right here. Oh, sorry, I have it upside down. This is a banner. I had a long time, took me a while to figure out what that looked like, but it's a banner. So let's just pretend that we have a slew of banners, shall we? Alright, we have a slew of banners to use, and you know, the Free People's Player has these dice to their disposition, but whatever. So, to start off, as I've already mentioned before, the Shadow Player has to use an action dice to initiate a battle. So the Shadow Player starts. He uses one of his action dice. By using it, I mean he takes it and discards it off to the side, and then he starts a battle. So he says to the Free People's Player that he is going to start attacking a particular place. So he would say something like, okay, this army attacking the Grey Havens. And for a better lesson on strongholds, let's say we had 6 units inside this little area. Now remember, the maximum number of blue or red units in any region, any at all, this one, this one, this one, this one, or this one, or this one, regardless if it has a stronghold or city, is 10. You can only ever have 10 red units or 10 blue units. If there's 2 units in the same region, like there will be soon here, it doesn't matter. We'll get to that, but the stacking limit is 10. Alright, so as we talked about, you know, the Shadow Player used one of their action dice, one of these ones, to initiate a battle. So they start attacking. Now, as far as strongholds are concerned, the Free People's Player has the option to retreat into the stronghold. When I say retreat, I mean they can take all their pieces right here, bunch them up, and they can go over to the designated stronghold for the Grey Havens, which is usually located on the side of the board or somewhere else. In this instance, it's right there. But we're not there yet. So like if I did do that, it would be really simple, you know, just pick up the pieces and put them over here in the Grey Havens. All of them would go. But there's a few rules with that. The main rule, or the main inhibiting rule, is the fact that you can only ever do that with 5 pieces. So for example, currently there are 6 units inside here. To be able to retreat into the stronghold, the Free People's Player would have to have 5 units. So here's where a lot of strategy comes in. I'm just going to give you just a few basic pointers. You can read the rules on yourself, but this is just going to cover as much as I can remember. Alright, so as you probably already know, the Shadow Player has an unlimited number of recruitment forces. He can recruit up the wazoo. Like, he can recruit over and over and over again. The Free People's Player cannot. Once a piece dies, once one of these little pieces dies, their blue pieces or their leaders, they go into a death pile, whatever. And you can't really ever recruit them back into the game. Once they're gone, they're gone. But the Shadow Player doesn't have that problem. They have like a practically unlimited number of forces. So as I mentioned before, you know, the Shadow Player uses one of their action dice. This is an army flag. It means you can take an army action. We'll just pretend they have 2 other army actions. And they say, I'm going to start attacking the Grey Havens. Well, if the Free People's Player decides, you know, they're not going to retreat into there, they think they can take this little army, or however big or small it may be, then a normal battle would ensue. You know, you roll the dice, re-roll for your leaders, and there's no advantage, you know. There's no like hitting on 6s the first round, it's just a normal battle. But if the Free People Player chose to retreat into the stronghold, they could, regardless of how many units they have up here. So for example, they have 6 units, they want to retreat into the stronghold, they can. All they would have to do is they'd have to remove 1 unit, and this unit would not go to the death pile, it would go to their available forces pile, because this unit did not die. It just kind of disappeared for a while. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but I like the rule because it helps when you're the Free People's player. So probably, most likely, in this instance, you could fight, but the Free People's player decides to run away. So they go inside their little box, off to the side. I know you can't see it, but just bear with it. And then the shadow player would have the option to move in. He doesn't have to move in. If he didn't, that would be a wasted action die, so we'll just say he moved in. He moved in. Alright, so now as you can see, the Free People's Army has retreated into the stronghold over here in the Greyhaven stronghold box. And the Shadow Army has come in and taken control of the stronghold of the Greyhavens. This is known as a siege, or being under siege. So the way that siege battles work, which is what this is called, when the Shadow Army or Free People's Army comes into a opposite player's stronghold and forces them to retreat into the stronghold, that's called a siege battle. Any battle after that is called a siege battle. As long as this army is here on top of the stronghold region, then it's a siege battle. So the way that these battles work is, we remember already from the previous turn that the shadow player had to use an action dice to attack. Well, they didn't really gain anything from attacking. The Free People's player just retreated. But they have 2 action dice left, and we're just going to assume, the Free People's player used up all their action dice. Just assume it. It can happen. Usually does. So now the shadow player says, alright, I'm going to attack the Free People's player while they are inside the stronghold. Not exactly extremely wise when the numbers are this stacked against their favor, but this is an example game, and we're just going to roll with it. So the way that this would work is the shadow player and the Free People's player, the shadow player would say, okay, I'm going to use this dice to attack. So they would first find out how much they can attack with. The shadow player has, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 red units. So he has a combat strength of 5, maximum of 5. We know that the Free People's player has a maximum strength of 5 right now, so they can, attack with 5. So they both attack. So the special rules that apply during this little siege battle are, we'll just pretend that this was a 5 and this one was a 6. Just pretend. Didn't have to be, but it is for this little example. So the special rules for a siege battle are that when the attackers are attacking, they can only hit on rolls of 6s. So they only inflict damage on rolls of 6s, or they only gain hits on rolls of 6s. So for example, these 2 5s right here, they would be null and void. They just are. And this 5 and 6 right here, the Free People's player would deal the shadow player 2 hits. It's an advantage to be defending inside the stronghold. It's not an advantage to be attacking a stronghold. That's just something you gotta remember. So then, they take their casualties. The Free People's player takes 1 casualty, and the shadow player says, I don't want to take 2, I'll just remove an elite. We've talked about this. It can go either way. So now the battle would be done, because you can only ever attack once when you use an action die, right here, to attack a stronghold. However, if the Sauron player, or the shadow player, was really tenacious and didn't really care about his pieces a whole lot, he could continue attacking if he downgraded one of his elite units. So for example, let's say that the Free People's player didn't score a hit, but the shadow player did. He scored a 6. Just like that. Well, if that was the case, then the little regular would be taken off. But if the shadow player wanted to continue the battle for one more round, or for any more subsequent rounds, he would have to downgrade one of his elites. So, that's really easy. He would have to take his little Isengard elite, right here, and downgrade it to a regular Isengard. This is one of the only times that it really matters what units you're using. So if you downgrade an Isengard elite, you have to downgrade it into an Isengard regular. There's no downgrading Sauron elites into Isengard regulars. It just doesn't work like that. So that's how that would happen. You know, you would lose the elite, but you would gain this, and then you could continue attacking another round. Otherwise, if he just, you know, didn't take any wounds, and he didn't want to downgrade, he could leave that there. But to attack again, he would have to use another action die. So let's just say he uses the action die. So, you know, he goes again, they both roll. Free People's player has a strength of 4. Oh, and they had their rerolls. You know, whatever. We talked about rerolls with the leaders. Same thing. So then we can imagine, you know, over time the game would, like in the next round, the Shadow player could lose 2 regulars. They could lose 2 regulars. It could happen. We're not going to go over that very well. We've already talked about how you can lose pieces. But now that the Shadow player has no more action dice left, if he wants to continue the battle, then he would have to downgrade his elite into a regular. So just as simple as that. You take off the elite, you go to your pile, you can use dead ones or ones that haven't died, it doesn't matter, no difference, and you put one down there. And because you've downgraded, or in a sense taken a casualty, you can continue attacking. So they continue attacking, and lo and behold, you know, just say that, you know, the Shadow player got really, really lucky, and they won, and you know, they kicked the Free People's player out of the stronghold. Well, if that happened, then control of the stronghold would revert to the Shadow player. So any you know, if a Free People's army came in, you know, from the Shire, and you know, they were kind of beefed up, and they came in and they just attacked, they would have to do the same thing the Shadow did, you know, move in with the dice, attack with the dice. So yeah, the Free People's player would have to move in with the dice, and then attack with the dice, and then, you know, the Shadow player would have the option to fight or retreat. Normally they would retreat into a stronghold, and then, you know, the same stronghold over here in the Grey Havens, and then, you know, the Free People's player would have to still again play by the same rules that the Shadow player did, downgrading elites, fighting the same way the Shadow player did. So basically, that's how strongholds work. They work they work the same way regardless of which player is controlling them. Alright, just to finish up with strongholds, some things to keep in mind. Just as before, as we talked about, every battle, or every time you roll the dice to administer hits, every time you do that, the only numbers that count are 6s for the attacker and 5s and 6s for the defender. Granted, you can have cards that modify these, but as a starting point, the attacker must always hit with 6s and the defender must always defend with 5s and 6s. If the attacker ever moves out of the region, then the stronghold is no longer under siege and these can come back out. Whereupon the attacker would have to spend another die to move these guys back into the stronghold, and then they could retreat back into their deeper stronghold area, and that would be that. These guys can never retreat from a stronghold because they're kind of captured by these guys, so they could never retreat to an adjacent region, and that's just basically how it would work. One thing I didn't ever talk about was, pretend that the stronghold wasn't here and it was just the Grey Havens. We had an army here and an army here. Let's say it was in Harlanden, right here. And you know, the blue guys are attacking and you know, the red guys are defending. So you know, we talked about how, you know, they can keep on going back and forth until one wants to retreat or one wants to stop attacking. Well, the things that stop a battle are, if the attackers want to stop attacking, you know, they're the ones who are administering the attack. Or another thing that can stop the battle is if the defenders want to run away. They do this by simply, you know, you roll it, so they can't retreat the first time. They have to fight at least one battle. So, you know, the attackers would roll their dice, whatever. The defenders would roll their dice, and you know, they would administer their casualties, you know, 2 here, 1 here, whatever, doesn't really matter. Forget the dice, don't pretend they're not there. That it could work out like that. And then, you know, after that first roll, before these guys roll again, the defender can say, okay, I'm retreating, and you know, they can retreat to an adjacent region. The only restrictions are you can't cross black lines and you can't jump into the ocean. Other than that, you can go wherever you want when you're retreating. But, however, if by some, you know, happy chance, you know, the Free People's Player, you know, had units down here in South Ered Luin, as you can see in the corner of the screen, right here, then they could not retreat. They would be forced to keep on battling over and over and over. So just some things to keep in mind, just some little simple strategy tips. Hope this helps. We're going to be moving on to another portion. It's either going to be the hunting phase or the political action, or the politics of Middle-earth. One or the other. Alright, at this point in the tutorial, I think it's prudent to just start a simple basic game. So I'm going to set up the board. I'm assuming that at home you can follow along. Well, you're not going to follow along because I'm not going to show you every step to set up the board. You can find lots of tutorials on this online. There's a great big illustrated photo in just about every instruction manual. You can go to Veldrin's site and download all the manuals that you want to your heart's content, and you can look at all the pictures on how to set this up. But I'm going to set up this game for War of the Ring with with Twilight of the Third Age expansion. So, in just a second, you'll go from not set up to fully set up. So this is the fully set up game, ready to play for War of the Ring. All the pieces are where they should be. Everything is ready to go, except for the cards. On second thought, I'm just going to do a simple base game. I'm not going to do a full expansion game. A base game will get you through all the rules, and then once you get the expansion, you can check out for yourself the cool little rule changes with that. So this will just be a base game for first edition. If you're playing second edition, it's practically the same. There's like one or two little differences. Alright, just some things to take notice of with this completely set up game. Here's the entire board. Alright. Over here, I have the hunting tiles. Yeah, for the Hunt for the Ring, that's the tile pouch that I use. Right there are the 3 cards for the 3 minions: Saruman, the Witch King, and the Mouth of Sauron. Right there in the center are the 8 tiles that can come into the game a little bit later through the use of cards. Right there is Gandalf the White and Aragorn, heir to Isildur, with their respective little counters. There's the dice that I will be using. In the top left hand corner are the cards, the sword cards and the banner cards, or the character cards and the army cards. We have all the pieces set up. The Fellowship is in Rivendell. We have a little score track down here indicating the Free People's score and the Shadow Player's score. All the pieces are set up and ready to go. Over in the corner are the 9 character cards, you know, the Gandalf, Strider, Aragorn, Boromir cards. Not Aragorn, but Strider cards. All the character cards, and the character figures, and the character counters. Over here we have Mordor with the Nazgul set up. Everything set up and ready to go. And we also have the cards that will be used during the game. The Shadows character or minion cards and the Shadows army cards. So that is the setup of the game. We will start in just a little bit. But yeah, just thought you'd like to see that. One other thing I failed to mention is right here in the top portion of the board are the ring counters. The Free People's Player starts with the 3 ring counters. Also over here on the other side of the board we have the political track. You can set up those political counters like it says in the book. That's how I'll be doing it. So basically this is really easy. Just look in any instruction manual and you will see the instructions for step by step how to get to this point. I'm not going to cover that. I remember by memory because I've played it for so very many times because I really like this game. And we'll be starting in just a little tiny bit. Alright, So to start talking about this game, or to start the walkthrough, we need to cover a few things. The first things that we need to cover are the action dice. The blue dice and the red dice are the action dice. Each player gets their own set of dice. So in the beginning of the game, the shadow player is going to start with 7 action dice, all 7 of these things. The Free People's player will start with 4. Sounds unfair, but it works out. So here's how that works. Alright, so you got these 3 cards down here, you know? You got these 3 cards for Saruman. You got the Saruman character card. You have the Mouth of Sauron character card, and you have the Witch King character card. I start out the game and I put a red dice on top of each of these, along with their little figure. This reminds me that as I'm playing, once these characters come into play, I then have access to this die, or whoever's playing the shadow player. So once the shadow player can bring these characters into play, they can then have access to these dice. It's very, very helpful. The same thing goes for the Free People's player. You know, they have Gandalf the White over here. Once he comes into play, the Free People's player gets another dice. Once Aragorn comes into play, the Free People's player gets another dice, or another die, whatever. So the basic point is, the more dice you have, the better off you are. Alright, so let's talk a little bit about the dice. First of all, I'm not going to go over any of the cards, meaning I'm not going to flip them over on this little video tutorial and read them to you. I'll read the names to you, like the names of the cards, but I'm not going to read what they do, hoping to not violate copyright violations or whatever. So if you're interested in this tutorial, you can grab out your own little cards from your own game and follow along. Alright, so continuing on with this little tutorial, the game starts off, you know, Free People's player has 4 action dice, shadow player has 7. I always put these dice here to remind me that the shadow player does not have these dice yet. Same thing with the Free People's player, they do not have access to these dice yet. Once these characters come into play, noted by these little cardboard pieces, and once these figures come into play, or these characters, then the dice come into play. So in the beginning of the game, each player will draw 1 army card and 1 character card from their respective decks. The Free People's players' cards look like this. This is an army card, noted by the little army and helmet symbol, and this is a character card, noted by the character symbol, or the character sword, whatever. Sting if you're really curious. The shadow player also has similar cards. His cards are noted by these 2. The one on the left is the character card. The one on the right is the army card, indicated by a banner on the right and a sword on the left. So in the beginning of the game, each player draws 2 cards, 1 of each, and then they roll the action dice. So let's just simulate a roll, shall we? So we can get started talking about these dice. Alright, these dice are everything in the game. These dice indicate what you can do, what you can't do. They give you special abilities with your cards. This is where a whole lot of this is one of the cooler mechanics of this game. They made this mechanic very, very well, in my opinion. This is what really makes a game, is how it's never the same twice. Alright, so first let's talk about these dice for a second. Starting with the Free People's player die, we can see that there's a few sides to this die. One side has let's see if I can get it close enough. Oh, that's blurry. But oh well. One side is a character action. Another side is an army/muster action. Another side is a muster action. And the other side is a Will of the West action. On the opposite side, on the left and right opposite sides, there's a Palantir action and another character action. So this dice has 2 character actions and one Palantir action, one Will of the West, one Army and Muster action, and one Muster action. All of the dice are the same, you know, they all have the same number of sides, well, but they all have the same imprinting on every side, so there's no difference between any two dice at all. Alright, let's talk about the Shadow Player's dice. You can probably figure it out. That is an Army action. That right there, the crown, is a Muster action. That's a Palantir action. Has to do with cards. And that's a character action. Or character movement. Whatever. And then on the opposite sides of the left and right, we have an Army/Muster action. And we have an eyeball, or the eye of Sauron. So this is just this indicates that it goes directly to the hunt box, but we'll get into that a little bit later. So also note that this dice has 2 Muster actions on it and 2 Army actions on it, along with a Palantir character and an eyeball. So that kind of gives you an idea of the direction to go in the game. The Sauron player should be going military, should be using his military strength to win the game, and the Free People's player should be using his character dice to win the game. That's just a general suggestion. You don't have to follow it, but we're just going to be going over a whole bunch. Alright, so that's how that would happen. You know, the people would shake their dice. We're not going to re-roll these because these are nice and random. I don't want those. I want something more exciting. Yeah, that works. That works very, very, very well. Actually, yeah, that works. We can go into others. Alright, so to talk about how to win the game, let's go over that a little bit. So, the Free People's player has 2 ways to win the game. They can either get the Fellowship, indicated by the Frodo and Sam figure, which starts in Rivendell, all the way down to the Crack of Doom. If they make it there, then the Free People's player wins. Or they can get a military victory, which is gaining 4 points. If they gain 4 points, they win. 4 points are, you can get points by smashing strongholds, gaining control of enemy strongholds, or gaining control of enemy cities. Enemy strongholds are worth 2 points, enemy cities are worth 1 point. The same thing goes for the Sauron player. He wins if he gains 10 points, so he would have to either take over, you know, 10 cities, but there's not 10 cities on the board, there's less than that. He'd have to some way somehow either take control of 5 strongholds or enough strongholds and cities that his accumulated total is over 10. Or he can corrupt the ring bearer. We'll get into that. So anyway, these dice are everything in the game. They indicate your actions. They indicate what you can do. As we've said before, this is a Muster action die, right here. This is Muster action, Muster an Army, character, Will of the West, it's a wild, it kind of counts for anything. Palantir, this is used for cards, and another character action. So this die has 2 character actions. We've been over this. This is an Army action, Muster an Army action, character action, eyeball, and Palantir. Really simple and basic. All the dice are the same, so all the red dice are identical, all the blue dice are identical. Alright, so as we mentioned before, the Free People's player has 2 ways to win. They can win by dragging the Fellowship, indicated by the Frodo and Sam figure, all the way down, some way somehow. It's up to the player how they want to do it. But some way somehow they have to get to Mordor, and they have to get to the Crack of Doom right there. Once the Fellowship makes it to the Crack of Doom, the Free People's player wins. Or, you know, gain 4 points. For the Collector's Edition, and I think for the 2nd edition, they included these cool little figures. I'll zoom in a little bit. You can barely see it, but there's 2 little sword splashes or things on every stronghold, that indicates 2 points. And for the cities, there's a single sword marking of sorts. It's in the bottom right hand corner of the city picture. That just means it's worth 1 point. So if the Free People's player gets 4 points, they win. Shadow player gets 10 points or corrupts the ring bearer, they win. The corruption for the ring bearer is noted right there on the top portion of the board. That's the fellowship track. The bottom counter indicates corruption, the top counter indicates their position. So once more, this is a corruption counter right here, and this is a position counter. This means they're hidden, that side means revealed. You can follow cards and figure out what that means, but I'm not going to tell you what the cards mean because no copyright. Notice that it starts at 0 corruption, and it can work itself all the way up to 12 corruption. So once the ring bearer has 12 corruption points, he dies. Frodo succumbs to the ring, puts it on, runs up to the ring wraiths and says, "Here I am, eat me," and they eat him, and then Sauron wins. Or whatever. Alright, so that's the fellowship. Now let's talk about the political track. Alright, so this is the political track, as indicated by the name. Remember, in the first part of the tutorial, I said that there are 8 nations vying for power in this game. The 8 nations are indicated by their nation counters. This is the North. This is the Dwarf Nation. This is Rohan. And this is the Elf Nation. Further down the track, we can find Gondor, indicated by the tree. We can find the Southron and Easterling Nation. The Saruman Nation, indicated by the white hand, and the Sauron Nation, indicated by the eye. On the very bottom box is the at war box. Once the nations are at war, it becomes very easy for them to muster, fight, and do some killing. Alright, we'll get into this a little bit later, but just for some vocabulary, please note that the elves currently have a blue background. Notice the blue background instead of a white background on the opposite side. Blue background means that they're activated, and which means that they're much more ready to start progressing down the political track. This white background on Rohan means that they're not activated, or they're passive, or whatever. That side would mean activated. Eventually, most of the nations will be activated in the game. Each side has an activated and a non-activated side. For the Free People's player, only the elves start out as an activated nation. All the others are not activated. But for the Shadow player, he can get going right off the bat. His nations are already activated, as indicated by their starting color, or the red border, versus this white border. Just ignore the white border on the Shadow player's tokens. You never use them. It just means that they're activated. Once the nations are at war, it becomes really easy to do things, but we'll get to that a little bit later. So, that's what that means. The blue background on the elves means it's activated. The white background on the other tokens for the Free People's player means it's not activated, or that they're passive.